Hey guys, it's Sean, and welcome to Volume 1 here of Youth Leader Uncut. In this episode here, you're going to be watching one of my previous sermons here talking about comparison between the different gods, so Jesus, Allah, polytheism, and really going to see what each god has to offer us, and really taking a look at that here in this particular sermon. I hope you guys enjoy it, and please let us know what you think down here in the comments below. Hope you have a great time watching, and please enjoy.
By asking you a question, why do we worship Jesus compared to other gods? There's many gods out there in the world. Whether you live over in Asia, whether you live here in America, there's many different influences out there. And I want to ask you, think here for a second here, why do you worship Jesus compared to other gods? So now that you've kind of taken a second thought about it, let's start to do a little bit of a comparison game here a little bit. Let's take a look at some of our key players here that we see. And my production team friends, if you could put up that slide for me, please, that would be awesome. So we have many different gods in the world. We have Allah, we have many polytheistic gods. And if you don't know what polytheism is the belief in many or multiple gods. So there's multiple gods out there in the world. And some religions believe that there's multiple in one worldview or one sect. So some, you may have heard of Hinduism, heard of Buddhism. A lot of those believe that there are many gods. Sometimes there's gods related to different parts as far as the sun. A lot of you may be familiar with Egypt too, with the Egyptian gods too. So a lot of those believe in polytheism or polytheistic gods. And if we first want to take a look at here with Allah, and Allah is the main God we see in Islam. And in Islam, they believe in the 5 pillars. And in those 5 pillars, what we see is that they encourage you to fast. They ask that you do a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is their holy place. And then you also see a consistent theme here of commitment to Allah being the one and only true God. And this is something I want us to think about here as we're going in and talking about kind of doing an analysis game. You've ever kind of taken a look here? I know in football, when we were looking at certain key positions, we're trying to see which player is better, which one's going to give us the most benefits. And our human nature is the same way. Which one's going to give us the most benefits as well? And if we take a look here at Allah, Allah is a very vengeful God. If you mess up, if you don't follow His rules, ultimately you're lucky if you make it to the next day, if I'm being fairly honest. And that's putting it nicely. He's very much to where He is not going to be very graceful and very forgiving like Jesus is. Jesus is a God who is full of grace, continuously wants you in a relationship with you. We take a look here at polytheism and some of our polytheistic gods. There's many of them. We have Shiva here in Hinduism, and she is a goddess, and there's multiple gods that we see in there as well, similar to Shiva. And ultimately, they will have a relationship with you only to guide your life. They don't really care so much about having a personal relationship with you. They're just more so, hey Alex, are you staying on track? Are you doing what I've told you to do already? If you're not, then you're going to have consequences. And sometimes those consequences is you don't go to heaven at all. You ultimately are stuck in this never-ending circle of if your good deeds don't outweigh your bad deeds, you're going to be stuck in this multiple circle where you're going to be reincarnated. And what I mean by reincarnation is I mean that you're going to come back as multiple different things, is their belief. So if you have a lot of bad deeds, you may come down as a bug and die multiple times. Or if you're maybe good, you may come back again as a human. It's really up to a game of chance a little bit in that sense. And ultimately here is that Jesus is the only God, I'm going to say this twice here, Jesus is the only God that's going to lead you to full life and seeks to have a personal relationship with you. There's a difference between a personal and an impersonal relationship as well. A personal means I actually want to have a conversation with you. So Hannah, I want to get to know you. I want to have a personal relationship with you. Impersonal is, hey Jesse, how are you doing? Kind of shake your hand and then move on to the next thing. I'm not so much caring to have a relationship. Yeah, we may talk here and then, but we don't really care to have a personal get to know you type relationship at all. And the other thing that's really cool about Jesus is a God who offers us grace. And I can't say that enough. Jesus is the only God in all of human history that we see that offers us grace. Allah is not going to offer you grace. Polytheistic gods are not going to offer you grace. Good vibes aren't going to offer you grace at all. Ultimately, Jesus is the only God that we see in all of human history that continuously shows us grace. And I know, raise your hand if you need grace. I know I need grace on a daily basis to where I ultimately come short and fall short ultimately each and every day. I need Jesus to give me and pick me up. I need to make sure that He's ultimately a part and a crucial part of my life. And what we also see here between mainly going a little bit more depth here of Allah, is that Allah has a consistent pattern. And consistent, I mean, they shows multiple times after multiple times again to where He shows that He makes mistakes. He's not showing grace at all. He doesn't really care. He may have a personal relationship with you, depending on who He really cares to have much of a relationship with. And ultimately, I want you to think about this here too. Would you want to put your life in the hands of a God like Allah, who is so much concerned about whether you're obeying or not, whether you're going to do what He says, and ultimately, He's waiting for you to make a mistake. He's looking almost with a magnifying glass on Marielle and saying, Marielle, I'm looking for you to make a mistake. And when you make a mistake, He's ready to punish you right then and there. Do you want to put your life in the hands of a God who's just waiting to punish you? Ultimately, Jesus is the complete opposite to where He's looking for how He can assist us. How can He have a personal relationship with us? And I want you to be thinking about that as we continue our kind of discovery here, our exploration here together. In polytheism, ultimately, people choose, they're originated as people choose and create their own gods. So they may be created out of culture or governments. If you've been watching the Chosen series with us, you've maybe seen in the Roman culture they have their own created gods, and ultimately the government back then would create gods so they could control the people even more. You may have heard of the Greek gods, the Egyptian gods. All of those gods fall in that same category to where they are just trying to control you. There's no benefit as far as them assisting you at all. And ultimately, it's a way of control. It's not so much, hey, I want to have a relationship with you or I'm going to offer you grace. It's more so they're continually looking for how can I make sure that you do what I tell you to do. And do you want a God, or I shouldn't even say a God, do you want a person or almost like organization telling you what you have to do? Rather than have Jesus come over who wants to have a relationship with you and shows that continuous grace. So now that we've talked a couple about polytheistic gods here, I know I'm going a little bit quick here. Polytheistic gods, Allah. I want us to take a look here at a video real quick, and here's some of our gods here, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at the screen behind me here for a few minutes here of this video. If we have it ready. And while we were waiting for that video to be queued, I'm going to take a look here back at the visual here behind us. We have Allah, polytheistic gods, idols, and Jesus. Those are our four main ones that we really see in our culture right now. We see idols becoming very prevalent. I'm going to talk on that here in a few minutes. We have polytheism, and then we also have Allah as well. And I want you to be thinking about this. I don't want it to seem like we're coming out of a place to where we really want to be judgmental on people who follow gods like this, but ultimately, how can we lead those people to Jesus? How can we have conversations with those that are seeking and starting to ask questions? I know one of my favorite apologists here, Ravi Zacharias, always asks that there's always a questioner behind each question. So ultimately, taking consideration the person before you're putting too much focus on the actual question itself. And we also did a couple of video series too, apologetic video series, if you guys are more curious about exploring some of those as well. I know we're getting that to the video set up in the back right now, but just be thinking about that too. Is ultimately, as we're having this conversation today, and we're talking about how we're comparing Jesus to other gods, ultimately, how can I have conversations with friends who I know that are in a bad spot right now, who maybe are getting trapped up with idols, getting trapped up with following Allah, trapped up with following polytheistic gods, because ultimately the call that Jesus has placed on our lives is to be that influence, inviting everyone our influence to full life in Jesus. And that's ultimately how we do it. And while we wait for that, gotta love that awkward silence. We are going to go ahead. I think we have it on the other screen. Yeah. Let's just give it a hand for our production team guys right now. They just did an amazing job. And look at our tech stuff there in the back. Huge props to you guys, and thank you guys for getting that set up. Because as we know, not everything goes to plan, as God's plans are ultimately the best plans, but not always in our timing. So let's just be gracious and let's be thankful in the time that we're in right now. Okay. And while we do that, actually, I'm going to move on to another part here as we wait on getting that set up. Nico, can I have you bring that platter up there? Platter up here, sorry. Thank you. And can you bring the table? Awesome. Sometimes we just got to make adjustments. Thank you, Nico. So ultimately here, I'm going to face this way so you guys can see it. Who likes a good buffet? Who likes a good platters here? Especially we're coming on Thanksgiving, we're coming on Christmas, all of these delicious food time of year. I call it the food extravaganza time of year between Thanksgiving and Christmas as we're getting ready for it. So I have a little bit of a platter. You may be sick of seeing candy, and I apologize for that, especially since we just had Halloween last week. But we have different candies here and different sweet tasting foods here on our platter. And ultimately, we have Kit Kat, we have Milky Way, Hershey's, and we also have some apples here as well. And I want you to think about it in this way. Each of these foods represents one God here. We have Hershey's here, which represents our polytheistic gods. Our Milky Ways here represents Allah, and then Kit Kat represents idols, and then our apples represent Jesus here. Ultimately, all of these taste really good. All of them taste really sweet. They have a really good taste to them. But only one of these foods is going to give you nutrition or full life your body truly needs to sustain itself. You may really like Hershey's. It may taste sweet for a minute. If you want to try olive for a minute, it may taste sweet. You may get a really good pick-me-up for a minute. But ultimately, like sugar, you're going to hit a crash. It may seem really good on the surface, but once you start to know more and more, you may start to say, this may not be as good as what I first thought I was going to eat. Same thing with Milky Way here with our polytheistic gods. This may taste really good at first. It may taste good worshiping to different idols or having a sun god, having Osiris if you're Egyptian. It may taste really good at first, but ultimately you're going to hit a point to where it's like, this isn't as great as I thought it was. And then with Kit Kats, here with idols, I created my own idol. This tastes really good at first, but ultimately you're going to be disappointed in it. The only one of these options here that's truly going to give you that nutrition your body needs is the apples, and that ultimately is Jesus. Apples give you nutrition, and that sustains your body longer compared to any other of these candies. Ultimately, they may taste all sweet on the surface, but once you get down to it, you start to look at the nutrition behind it, only one of these is going to offer you full life, and that is the apples. And you may have to work, the other thing with these other gods here is you ultimately have to work to them. And the awesome part about Jesus, who's ever heard, this may be a little bit of a dated reference, of Stairway to Heaven. It's a little bit of an older song, some of you maybe heard it, some of you may not have heard it. But Jesus is very much the opposite to where Almost every other god, you have to work your way up. It's a stairway to heaven. I have to make sure I'm doing good deeds. I have to make sure I'm listening to Allah. I have to make sure that I'm worshiping each and every day. Or else I'm not going to go down, or ultimately I won't go up to heaven. And each time I make a bad deed, I have to go backwards. I'm not able to go forwards at all. And most of the time it feels like I'm going back. I'm not able to work my way forward at all. But with Jesus, he's already come down to us. It's a stairway from heaven with Jesus, not a stairway to heaven. And ultimately, who wants to worship a God who comes down, who wants to have a relationship with us? I know I want to worship a God who comes down, he works his way, or not so much work, but he comes down to us. He doesn't have to do that, but he wants to. Who wants a God that wants them for who they are? I know I want a God who wants me for who I am. Awesome. And another thing that may take the place of God in your life are idols. And idols, this is a little bit of a touchy one. I'm not going to lie. It's a very touchy subject with idols because ultimately, whether we realize it or not, or cognizant of it or not, we ultimately fall into this trick of where we create idols in our lives. And idols, the cool part is you get to create them. You have control over them. But just like any human-created item, it is limited. It has limitations. Just like how we have limitations, human idols have very much of those same characteristics. They're very limited. And ultimately, an idol could be another person. It could be someone you're dating right now. It could be that person. It could be social media. If you're spending 12 hours a day on Snapchat, 12 hours a day on Instagram, that's becoming an idol for you. Or maybe you're really excited to get the new iPhone 12. That could become an idol for you in your life as well. But when you need help from an idol, you're going to be disappointed after disappointed because idols don't have that same fulfillment that Jesus gives you in your life at all. Idols very much are going to be consistently, they may be there, but they're not going to be present there. They're not going to help you or assist you in your life. And biblically speaking, we can go back, idols originate all the way back into the book of Genesis when we see Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And the Israelites ultimately get to this point to where they are very impatient with God and they decide that even though you've done all these things for us, and you're not showing up this time, we're really just going to push you to the side, and we're going to create our own idol that we're going to worship because we can control it, and we don't have to be reliant on you. And this is a trick that the Israelites fell into. And ultimately, it had a lot of significant ramifications there. Not any good ones for the Israelites, by any means. And the book of Romans here does a great job of telling us how and why idols were formed here, out of Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 23. It says they know the truth about God because he's made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky through everything God made. They can clearly see his invincible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. And here's the key part I want us to focus in on here. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. They began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. And as a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshipped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. So ultimately, they fell into the same trick that the Israelites did. And the book of Romans does just an amazing job here of showing us that people at the beginning, way back when, Adam and Eve, their descendants, they knew God. They ultimately had a relationship with him at the very beginning. But ultimately, just like the Israelites, they became tired, they became foolish, and they started to think of ways, how can we create our own gods that aren't God, and ultimately start to separate ourselves as a result of sin separation. That Tanner did an amazing job last week, talking about separation between us and God. And these people, and ultimately us, we have a lot of people in our society who fall into this same trick right now, that they claim to be very wise, but ultimately they're almost the farthest away from God they can possibly be, claiming that they are wise in those situations. And ultimately, you cannot be wise without God in your life. I'm going to say it one more time. You cannot be wise in your life without God. You'll hear many people claiming to be wise, especially As you get older in college, you'll hear professors say, I'm the wisest person you know. And ultimately, they could be the furthest person away from God that you have in your influence. So take that into consideration here. And here's a little bit of a math equation here for you guys. So some of you may like math, some of you may not like math here, but a little bit of math equation here is know God plus worship equals idols. I'm going to say it one more time. Know God plus worship equals idols in our lives. When we don't have God, we don't have that relationship with Jesus in our life, we have a void in our lives. And ultimately that lays the way to where we have idols start to come in. And ultimately, when we start to see this occur, they are a lot of ramifications, a lot of consequences for that. And you may be thinking, well, I don't worship anything. Yes, you do. You worship something in your life. And what we worship is ultimately what we think the most about. Are you thinking about right now, I'd rather be on Snapchat than listening to John talk about this right now? Would I rather be thinking about lunch right now? But ultimately, it could be a whole different concoction of different things. It could be from Snapchat, it could be our phone, it could be social media, it could be even self-image too. Self-image has become very much, especially in this day and age, it's become a strong point of people worshiping and being so consumed about how do I look? Am I making sure I'm giving off the strongest impression that I can to others in my influence in my life? And ultimately, God takes you where you're at. Jesus takes you where you're at, which is the great part. This is why I love Jesus so much, is that he ultimately comes in, he's come down to this point, he's shown us grace, he wants a relationship with you, and he's the only perfect God that we see in all of human history. And when you get that all together, not just one, we see many different gods that claim to just be one of those things each. They may claim to be perfect, they may claim to be great, to offer grace, they may claim to be in that place, or yes, offer grace, perfect, and one of a personal relationship with you, but you're not going to ever see another God that has all three together in one component, one characteristic, to where they really want you. They want you, and God wants to have that relationship with you. Awesome. Who likes a good story? Who likes a good story? A little bit of story time real quick. And some of you may have heard this story before. So during my 8th grade year, so for my middle school friends who may be able to relate to this here, during my 8th grade year, I stepped away from my relationship with Jesus. And it was out of a place of anger and frustration I had, along with insecurities as well. And during that same time, I became really interested in football. I loved watching football, I loved watching the NFL. And since I didn't have that relationship in my life, it opened this place to where idols started to creep their way in. And ultimately, football became an idol in my life. All I thought about was, when am I going to watch football? Who is my favorite player? Where am I going to go watch football with my friends? It all became consumed and all revolved around football. And all I did was think about it, and eventually it hit a crashing point here. Some football fans may relate, Falcon fans, you may relate to this from the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, but it hit a crashing point. I remember watching, it was a playoff game during the 2011 AFC Championship game, which for my non-football fan friends, this is the game right before you get to the Super Bowl. If you win this game, you're in the Super Bowl, so a lot at stake. And ultimately, I was disappointed as I saw a drop pass and I saw a missed field goal within the final minutes. And I was just devastated that the whole season worked up all the way to fall short within one game to get that close. And I remember just kind of just falling down, just crying in the past for 2 hours after that game ended, because I was just so devastated. I was like, why did it have to come so close only to get so far away from the game? And I had a question pop up in my head as I was during those 2 hours. It was, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life? And the response to that was, there has to be something more to life than this. And you may be at a point right now to where you've been stuck or in a consistent pattern of having idols in your life. And you may be wanting the same thing. What am I doing with my life? What's the purpose of my life? And that you're starting to think about there has to be something more to life than this. And I have some great news for you. Jesus wants a personal relationship with you. He offers you grace. and he is the only perfect God in human history. If you don't take anything else away from the sermon here today, just remember that Jesus wants you. He wants that relationship with you. He's the only God that we see that's going to offer you grace in your life. Polytheism is not going to offer you that. Allah is not going to offer you that. Good vibes is not going to offer you grace at all. The only thing that's going to offer you grace is Jesus, and ultimately giving our lives to Jesus as a goal. Who or what is leading your life right now? Maybe you have some idols that are leading your life right now. You may be spending those 12 hours like we talked about on Snapchat a day. You may be idolizing football like I did in middle school and just stuck in consistent pattern. Maybe you're worshiping another God right now, whether it's polytheism or maybe even worshiping Allah. I want to ask you, what or who is leading your life? What or who is leading your life? I have some great news for you today. If you're in that place like I was in 8th grade, where you're stuck in idols or you're stuck worshiping another God, there's going to be an opportunity here in the next minute or two where you're going to reestablish that relationship with Jesus or be able to establish it for the very first time in your life. Jesus loves you. He wants a relationship with you, and there's no other God like Jesus. Use that as your point moving forward here. What's your motivation to? If you're maybe you have Jesus in your life right now. What's your motivation right now? And I'm going to give you a quick and easy one right now. Think back to that first time when you were that person who was lost. Think back to when Jesus reached down and he wanted that relationship with you. There was a great scene last week, if you're following us with The Chosen, and Jesus and the disciples, they come across a man who has leprosy. And he's just walking down the pathway, and a lot of the disciples they're saying, "Rabbi, teacher, don't go towards that man. He has leprosy. Don't breathe in." And John even pulls out a knife on the guy and just saying, "Stay away, stay away." And Jesus immediately pushes them off to the side. He goes down and he goes as the man is crying and weeping, and he does something that's amazing. He reaches down to the man's level. He reaches his hand and he heals the man. And that shows so much about the characteristics of Jesus, to where he doesn't view himself so greatly that he's not willing to get to our level to heal us. You may feel like you're way too far away. Jesus is nowhere near me. I can't come close to him at all. But Jesus is just waiting for you to say that moment, yes. And he's going to come down on his knee. He's going to heal you, and he's going to reestablish that relationship